I'm sure we're getting hungry, so I'll try to stay within the time limits for this, but my name is Darren Rowe, and I worked with Willie Harrison and John Salmon on this paper. We're all affiliated with BYU in the engineering department, and it's called the 2-point dilemma. It's an American football study that we did. There we go. Okay, so I want to start off with the game that actually motivated this study. So obviously, being from BYU, I'm a BYU football fan. There was a game against Boise State when I was 15 years old that I went to, and the ending was very interesting to me. It kind of hooked me into this idea to study this years later with Dr. Harrison. So what happened in this game is the defense is dominated probably more than any I've ever seen in a football game. Late in the fourth quarter, it was 7-0. The only score was a defensive touchdown. You can see this big slow guy for Boise State running in an interception for a touchdown. So the offenses had not scored anything. Boise's offense had missed a short field goal. They had turned the ball over from BYU's 1-yard line, so they only had to move forward 1 yard after a fumble, and they could not do that. BYU's offense was probably even worse, 5 turnovers and 200 yards, a very low output for those of you who aren't as familiar with football. BYU's struggling offense managed to barely score a touchdown with a couple minutes left. So they get 6 points, they're down by 1 point, 7-6. And again, for those who aren't familiar with the situation, when you score your 6-point touchdown, you can go for a 1-point PAT kick. It's very easy, you convert it almost every time. So that would tie it and send it to overtime. The alternative decision is you could go for 2. You try to get 3 yards and then you'll get 2 points. If you convert that, you likely win the game. If you don't convert, you likely lose the game. So BYU decides to run their offense out onto the field and go for 2. And my little 15-year-old brain was ticked. I was screaming at the crowd. I was like, why are we having our offense go out on the field when they've been so bad all game to try to convert this 2-point conversion? We should kick and go to overtime and let both our offense and defense be a part of this decision. The coach couldn't hear me from the stands, unfortunately. The offense went out on the field and attempted the 2. They missed. BYU never got the ball back, and they lost. So I spent the entire drive home from Boise to Provo, about an 8-hour drive, researching, did BYU make the correct choice to go for 2? And what about all other college football games in this situation late in the game? And I couldn't find any data outside of very basic, 2-point conversion percentages, but no real detailed analysis on what if it's high scoring, what if it's on the road, what if the other team is ranked and better than you, as was the case in this Boise game. And so years later, when I was at BYU working with Dr. Harrison, we decided to attack this topic. So just to clarify the exact scope and situations that we studied, we are not doing NFL with this because it's kind of a fundamentally different approach for various reasons. We're looking at NCAA FBS games where a team is down by 7 and scores a touchdown late in the game, so now they're down 1, faced with the PAT versus 2-point decision that I've described. We're comparing the win percentage, not the conversion rate of a PAT versus 2-point. As I said, PATs are almost always converted. 2 points are usually 40 to 50%. So we're not comparing that. We're comparing how often do you go on to win the game based on your decision. The scope is 2002 through 2019. The reason for that is we conducted the research in 2019, and before 2002, the data necessary to conduct this research was quite sparse. Also, conversion rates were quite a bit lower for 2-point conversions before this time, so it actually skewed our data, so we didn't want it. We picked any game that included this situation in the final 6 minutes of regulation or overtime. 6 minutes is a pretty generous conservative cutoff. Most teams only go for 2 within the last 3 minutes, but we just wanted to make sure we captured all possible games. And we had 577 total games analyzed. Just to give you a background on why teams go for 2 and kind of the phenomenon we're seeing, it's 3 times more common that teams go for 2 in this situation from 2010 to 19 as opposed to 2002 through 2009. So there's clearly an increased aggressiveness. There's a perception that it's a good idea to go for 2. And so we're trying to investigate whether that's true. There are also 3 common situations where teams go for 2. On the road, as an underdog, or in a high-scoring game. And just to briefly explain what I think the thought process is behind that. As the road team, it's kind of like, well, it's going to get really loud and raucous during overtime. We don't want to deal with that. Maybe we're jet lagged, we're tired. Let's just get this game over with and see if we can win on this play. As an underdog, you're thinking the other team is better than us on paper. Over time, if you drag it out, they're probably going to win. But if you bring it down to this one play, maybe we'll get lucky and beat them. And then in a high-scoring game, we trust our offense. They've demonstrated they can score. So we want to give them the opportunity to win. This led, the 3 factors I just mentioned, led us to include those factors in this study along with the 4th that they'll get to. So we analyze whether the team making the decision is at home versus on the road versus at a neutral site, whether they're favored versus the underdog or a heavy underdog, which we define as a 10+ point underdog. So we went back and found the Vegas betting lines for all of these games before the game. Whether the game is high scoring or low scoring, and we define that as 29 points or more for the winning team. And then how much time is left. Is it in overtime? Is it late in regulation, which we define as 0 to 3 minutes left? Or is it 4 to 6 minutes left? We rounded to the nearest minute on that topic. So after collecting all of these games, we conducted a 2-sample z-test for proportions for each factor, each set of data we have. We compared the win percentage of teams going for a PAT to the win percentage of teams going for 2. One-sided test in favor of the decision with the higher win percentage and a significance level of alpha equals 0.1. We also we analyzed each individual factor that I listed on the previous slide, as well as each combination of 2 factors. So for example, if you're a home underdog, if you're a road underdog, if you're home in overtime, etc. And then I'll note that combinations of 3 factors did not provide sufficiently large data sets. So it will be interesting to continue this research in the future. Here's the results that we found, and I'm going to leave this table up for the next few slides, but kind of talk about different aspects of this table as we go. There were no factors at all in our study that gave significant support for going for 2, but all of these factors here give significant support for the 1-point PAT attempt. And you can see the top 4 are individual factors, and below that are all combinations of 2 factors that gave a significant p-value of less than 0.1. You can see the number of PAT games, the PAT win percentage, number of 2-point games, and 2-point win percentage for comparison there. So I want to point out the most significant factors. You can see here the low scoring and late in regulation factors have a p-value of 0.014 and 0.019. So our study very emphatically showed that if there's some time remaining, you probably don't want to go for 2 if it's late in regulation, probably because the other team has some time to go back and score a field goal if necessary. And then if it's low scoring, you probably don't want to trust your offense. When these 2 factors are combined with each other, the bottom line of the table, 0.009. And ironically, this BYU Boise game that motivated this study was low scoring, late in regulation. So our study very clearly shows they should not have gone for 2. It's 6% win percentage if you go for 2, compared to 41% if you pick up PAT. We also want to bust some of the myths, the conventional thinking. As I said, teams usually go on the road as an underdog or in a high-scoring game. And we showed here that as a road team or as an underdog, if it's low-scoring or late in regulation, you definitely should be kicking and not doing what teams usually do and go for 2. It's not to say that you should go for 2 in other situations. It's just kind of a toss-up, but you definitely should be kicking a PAT if it's still in regulation or low scoring. And then this motivated an analysis of time from a continuous perspective, because of course it's very different when there's 20 seconds left versus 2.5 minutes left. When there's 2.5 minutes, maybe it's a different situation because the opponent can go back and score. So we did this continuous analysis. The left-hand curve is the win percentage for teams who kicked a PAT. The right-hand curve is win percentage for teams who went for 2. The height of the curve is the win percentage. And then as we come kind of from the back to the front of the diagram is less and less time. So no time left, 6 minutes time left on the back. And so you can see it kind of ebbs and flows, but overall, the PAT is always the more advantageous decision, although it's closest with about 2 minutes to play. We also wanted to do an overtime analysis, and these diagrams are a bit confusing, so I'll explain quickly. The left diagram is regulation, the right is overtime. And then this left-hand column is the win percentage. The height of the red is the win percentage of teams who went for 2. And the right-hand column is PATs. And so you can see that in regulation, it's far more advantageous to kick a PAT. In overtime, it's roughly even. And in fact, there are a few situations, such as if you're on the road, an underdog, or in a high-scoring game, the win percentage was actually slightly higher. It never met our significance threshold, so we're not saying you absolutely should go for 2, but in overtime, basically have at it. Maybe you can go for 2 if you'd like, but certainly be careful in regulation. And so our conclusions are that teams are increasingly being aggressive and going for 2, especially when on the road as an underdog or in high-scoring games, and that our data actually advises not to do this, particularly if it's low scoring or late in regulation, and that college football teams can improve their chances of winning by using our data. Thank you.
Thank you. So at the end, you got the answer. You had you were age 15 years old.
Yeah, so I justified my answer. Yeah,
it was a good decision.
Yeah. No bias in our study, I don't think, but yeah, we.
So it was a good decision, they did.
No, it was the wrong decision. They should have.
Wrong decision.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any question? You know the rule, right?
In your opinion, or excuse me, my name is Isaiah, Carl findings, what, in your opinion, rose the popularity for the 2-point conversions from like 2010 to 2020?
You have a mic.
Oh, yeah.
Or the analytics you think that caused that to happen?
Yeah, good question. I think.
I think we didn't get the question. Can you again?
Yes, sure. Everybody now says, oh, the analytics say go for 2-point conversions. And you mentioned that from 2010 to 2019. What were the analytics you think that go against what you found? Like, where did those come from?
Yeah, so you're asking why is it becoming so much more frequent in recent years to go? Yeah, good question. I think a big part of it is that analytics in most situations in football strongly does advocate for being more aggressive than teams traditionally have been. So for example, a long time ago, teams would run the ball 80% of the time. Now they throw all the time. Teams would typically punt on 4th down. Now they go for it on 4th down. And the analytics actually say that's advantageous. This area of study has a pretty weak set of analytics. There's not a lot out there. And so I think teams make the assumption, well, over here you should be more aggressive. Over here you should be more aggressive. Over here there's no data, so let's just be more aggressive. And you just kind of guess at it. Is what I think is going on. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. My question is, do you think there's a significance at the level of sport? So would this change if you're grassroots, if you're college, if you're NFL? How would the level of the sport, the quality of that level affects the research?
Yeah, good question. It definitely would, and that's actually why we isolated to this. Is we don't want to skew results that wouldn't be significant in the college level. So in the NFL, 2-point conversion rates are different than in college. Overtime is different. I don't need to get into all the nuanced rules, but basically you can tie in the NFL and the first team to score wins, whereas in college you trade back and forth until the tie is broken. In high school, kicks are PAT kicks are missed more frequently, so maybe you'd be more inclined to go for 2. So it'd be really interesting to run an NFL study or a high school study, but that would certainly give different results than this.
Okay, thank you so much.